The premise. The task presented was to create a game scene based upon a given theme. There were many to choose from, and the theme chosen was a post-apocalyptic city. The scene was to be made using only code, so no existing game engines were allowed to be used to create the scene. The scene was required to be programmed in the C++ language and use OpenGL. Features. There are many features in the scene, such as a first-person camera with mouse movement, 5 static 3D models, a flat plane, keyboard movement for the player, UV textures, and a skybox. The scene also has advanced features such as a third-person camera, dynamic models that move around the scene, a high map terrain, heads-up display, and a functioning minimap. First and third-person cameras. By pressing the space key, the player can switch between 2 different cameras, a first-person camera and a third-person camera. The first-person camera allows the player to look around using the mouse. This works by de-rendering the one camera and rendering the other when switching between the two, so they're not both rendered at the same time. Here is the code to create the cameras for the scene. In the update method I have it so they always move with the player. Here is where every object is rendered for the 2 cameras. 3D static and dynamic models. There are 5 static models in the scene. These include the rock, the tree, the crate, the pillar, and the houses. These models have UV maps which have been used to have textures applied to them. There are also dynamic models. These include the statue and the bird. The statue is set to constantly rotate on the spot, and the bird is set to move along the screen and rotate the other way when it gets to a certain point. Here is the code showing how the models have been imported. Here they have been loaded from a file. Flat plane and height map plane. There is a flat plane that is set beneath the height map. This plane is textured and covers the ground. The height map is where the actual scene is built on. This height map is different to the flat plane. They are 2 separate things. The height map uses this image to generate its shape. The darker parts are lower down and the lighter parts are higher up, giving the shape of the terrain. Here is the code for the height map to work. Movement. The player can move using the WASD keys on the keyboard. W moves the player forward, S moves the player backwards, and A and D rotate the player left and right. The player is another dynamic 3D model that is controlled through the input. Here is the code for the movement. This gets the input from the keyboard. Skybox. The scene uses a skybox. This is made by having 6 images form a cube around the scene. Here is the code for that. HUD. The game features heads-up display. There are 2 sprites for this. One tells the player how to switch camera, and the other tells the player how to move. These are both 2D sprites. Minimap. The scene has a functioning minimap. This shows the current location of the player. It works by using the same inputs as the player. When the player moves along the x-axis, so does the icon. When the player moves along the z-axis, the icon moves along the y-axis instead. Linux. The scene can also be ran on Linux. This was made possible by using a software called VMware.